In this ad, Hyundai sells us an EV humans have waited for our entire evolution. Hey friends, welcome to the channel. My name is Steven. I'm a brand strategist working for an ad agency in Toronto. And on this channel, we examine and analyze advertising in close detail. The purpose of this video is to develop an understanding of how Hyundai's history of evolution ad works. If you haven't seen it, I'm gonna play it right now. If you've already seen it, skip ahead to the next section.
You know, we humans have come a long way on our journey. Our first language wasn't exactly, well, a language. Medium well, thank you. Our first vehicles weren't the fastest.
Can you,
Faster. Hey, boys, punch it! Our first maps weren't that accurate. And you know, fellas, the world is actually, you have a ball. Our first phones weren't smart. Text mom winky face emoji. Our first screens, you couldn't touch.
Mom, Dad's feeling the TV.
No one likes a snitch, son.
And the first electric vehicles weren't, let's just say, they look nothing like the first ever Ioniq 5. I mean, two-way charging, AR heads-up display, 300-mile range. What can't this thing do? Look, the point is, it's been a long,
Yeah, good point. Really long journey.
but worth it.
Your journey at its most evolved, the fully electric Hyundai Ioniq 5.
You know, used to be if you fancied something, you paid its dowry, took on its debts, and invited its entire family to come live with you. Nowadays, all you have to do is click the subscribe button. Right there. Click it. With this.
A view of linear chronological progress provides the framework for this ad to show how our technology has evolved over time. The first telephone is to the 19th century as the smartphone is to us today. The first TV is to the 50s as QLED is to us today. And here we have an early EV being compared to the new Ioniq 5. By putting their EV in the same technological progression as language, maps, the telephone, and the TV, Hyundai is placing it in a great tradition, a line of inventions that eventually changed everything about the world as we know it. These 6 historical scenes are juxtaposed in a style called parataxis. The audience is left to infer the connection between the past and our present. We can't help but compare that phone to the modern phone, that TV to our modern TV, or that snitching kid to Gen Z. In doing this, the ad uses a familiar cliche.
To run a growing business is to be on a journey.
And while it was a journey to find myself.
welcome to the perfect journey.
Listen to how many times a certain word is mentioned.
We humans have come a long way on our journey. Good point. Really long journey.
Your journey at its most evolved.
This ad uses cliches like there's no tomorrow. It helps the audience to instantly understand what they're seeing. Each vignette loaded with cliches instantly communicates where the story is set. Unconsciously, you'll recognize the image because it's familiar. It's full of symbols that we've seen over and over again. It's a useful technique when you only have 9 seconds to communicate something. Now, cliches and archetypes are related. Archetypes are made from cliches. It's a very typical example of a certain person or thing. To put all of these symbols in the scenes is to make an archetypal display out of cliched objects which would have been meaningless in isolation. Think of the starter pack meme. Starter packs are a group of cliches that together create an archetype. The archetype is inferred. You create the image in your mind when you're supplied the cliches. For example, all the cliches about ancient Rome, the columns, costumes, and makeup that you would have seen in various media, if you piece them together in one sequence, you can create an archetypal image of Rome. These short scenes have to articulate that's definitely that time and place. They have to pack in as many symbols as possible. It's an exaggeration of the setting. So the caveman scene was more caveman than anything you would have seen in that actual time 10,000 years ago. The bearded caveman beside a fire, grunting, accompanied by volcano? We get the archetypal sailor who thinks they're going to fall off the face of the earth. Then in the telephone scene, the 19th century gentleman has a top hat, formal attire, and the globe missing from the map scene. In the TV scene, check out the retro clothing, color of the walls, and the furniture. We know it's the late 50s or 60s, definitely not the 70s. Jason's not wearing flared pants. In the 90s EV scene, it's Jason's blow-dried and hairsprayed coif, his jacket, and the size of the car, which together form an image of the 90s. All these cliches were invisible in their own time. They would have blended into the background even when put together like this. But enough about cliches, I'm beating a dead parrot. Our technology, our modern media has given us the ability to make the past into a commodity. Yesterday's cliches become the raw material we make into archetypal forms. Why are archetypes used? It has to do with compression. To affect an audience within a window of 60 seconds, you have to create a compressed story. You can't tell a narrative in 5 to 8 second scenes. So instead, you have to include these symbols that together infer the context for time and place. The key to understanding this ad's effectiveness comes by considering what technology is compared to the Ioniq 5. One thing left out of the ad's story of the evolution of technology is gas-powered cars. Hyundai is explicitly staying away from mentioning them, even referencing the human-powered car. Focusing on the early model EV relative to the new and improved Ioniq 5 means they've excluded gas cars completely. This way, Hyundai gets to avoid making the obvious argument that electric car makers stress all the time. The cliche arguments in favor of EVs are absent from this commercial. We don't hear anything about energy efficiency, emission reduction, or lower maintenance costs, which is ironic because this ad relies on cliches for effect in the history scenes. The argument is not why you should pick the Ioniq 5 over a gas car. They're just saying, hey, our electric cars are now better than you think they are. To bring to life the idea that our technology has evolved over time, the advertisers used a compare and contrast method. Instead of comparing competing brands, they compared the past with the present, their new technology with other new technologies of history. It's hard to judge value without comparing to something else. Advertisers know this. These 6 historical scenes are intended to portray humans using the latest technology of their time period. But if you think about it, it's not exactly a fair argument. Unlike the historical characters, Jason Bateman has the advantage of hindsight. The earliest TV and telephone were technical marvels of their time. They would have been celebrated as amazing feats. These first versions of technology only suck in comparison to today. The fact that someone risked their lives while at sea to come back with a map was probably valuable to the next guy who wanted to sell spices on the other side of the world during his sea voyage. And relative to the 90s, electric vehicles were an impressive innovation that could seat a full 3/4 of a person. Of course, you're not watching this ad for the history lesson. You're watching because it's funny and it's Jason Bateman. The grievance inside the humor comes from the acknowledgement that, with the benefit of hindsight, the first version of what humans invent is underwhelming. It's a truth that the beta version is usually the weakest. Hyundai allude that past EVs haven't been great vehicles. It's a bit of a mea culpa, a formal acknowledgement of personal fault. They're saying that while EVs started out as not the best vehicles, lots of influential technologies started out that way. And this new EV is different. The time when electric cars were inferior is history compared to today. Heck, maybe in 10 years we'll laugh at this Ioniq 5 too. The humor partly disguises the fact that in the not so distant future, even this EV will be considered obsolete. In conclusion, Hyundai's ad presents the Ioniq 5 as a marvelous feat of contemporary engineering. Parataxis and cliches shift the audience's interpretation of past technology, encouraging people to believe this EV is the current pinnacle of electric vehicles. You know, it used to be if you wanted to learn about advertising and rhetoric, you enrolled in school. Nowadays, all you have to do is watch this video or click subscribe.